Hi everyone, this is Anne. This is my family career genogram. We'll go ahead and start over here on my father's side. So, my paternal grandfather and my paternal grandmother met in college. They both went to college from very different backgrounds. My grandfather was from a working class Swiss immigrant background. My grandmother's family came over on the Mayflower. So, different. Her family was also very, very wealthy from Chicago, and her father was a VP at Ford Motor Company. So they had a lot of trouble. He had a lot of trouble keeping a job, and they also had a child that had major psychiatric and psychological disabilities from brain damage that was sustained during birth. My father was the oldest. He went on to become a dentist. He was very determined to not grow up in a house with a lot of financial chaos, which they had because my grandfather couldn't keep a job and my grandmother had to take care of Greg. Then my aunt, the youngest in the family, is also a college grad. She became a speech pathologist. When my grandparents finally did divorce, my grandmother did then become pretty amazing in terms of her career savvy. She became a businesswoman. She opened multiple businesses. She also became a real estate agent, president of the board of realtors for the San Gabriel Valley. She was a playwright. I think she was also gay. And she had a business partner who she called her best friend. And I think there might have been something more. Anyway, that's just some background there. Then over on my mom's side, my grandfather became a surgeon. He was from a Midwestern Swedish family, and he also was a World War II vet. He was in the Pacific Theater as a surgeon. When he retired from being a chief of surgery at Huntington Hospital in Pasadena, he bought a big ranch, and he raised cattle and pigs and had a big olive orchard, and that ranch still is in my family and is actually now run by one of my uncles. My grandmother came from an immigrant family from Scotland. She's of the Duncan clan, and she grew up in sort of a very working class, on the poor side family. They had a dairy farm in Idaho, but she was able to educate herself and become a nurse. And so the two of them met when my grandfather was finishing his residency in Chicago. They ended up moving out to California when my grandfather was drafted into the Marines. And then all these children happened. My mom's oldest sister died 3 days after birth. Then Janet did go to college. She became an autism specialist. My mom went to college and graduated also from graduate school with a master's in library science, and she just retired this year. She's been a children's librarian for a long time. And all her younger siblings also went to college. A degree in agricultural business, a psychologist and yoga instructor, an architect and stay-at-home mom, and also someone else who's a horticulturalist, someone else, my uncle, and runs a horse ranch near the other ranch, actually. Some images that are important over here is the image of the soldier, this sort of ghost of my grandfather's experience in World War II just seemed to always exist in the family, and I love how I'm talking with my hand on this video. You like my hand, everybody? Anyway, so that was always something that was in the ether for us. And then my grandmother, she was extremely intuitive. This is a little hummingbird, if you can see. And she used to sit in her room at the ranch and just watch the birds. And she just seemed so content with that. And she had a little glass hummingbird statue in her room. And so whenever I see one, she's who I think of. So, moving down to our generation here, My oldest brother has a master's in public policy, and he's a city manager in Garibaldi, Oregon, which is on the coast. And then my brother Ben has a master's in construction management. He's a real estate developer in Denver, Colorado. And then there's me. And I started out teaching. I actually did graduate school for a while in a literature department down at UC San Diego and was teaching. I taught for 5 years, and then I got sick and I couldn't teach anymore. So things shifted, and obviously I'm finishing this master's now and unemployed, in debt, exhausted, but really happy with my choice. So just some images that kind of link some of the feelings together about my family and my childhood and things like that. So when I was growing up, we would always leave LA on the weekends and go up to the ranch. And so just these boots just indicated there was this big mudroom at the ranch, and we all had our boots there. And so when we would drive up there and we'd get there, we'd take off whatever shoes we had and we'd put our boots on. It was just this transition. And this ranch is just definitely a part of my deep soul, my makeup. And it's always an interesting transition leaving here and going there. And this is a syringe. So many people in my family are part of the healthcare, medical world. And it's always a sense of like, well, someone has the answer to that. Someone has the answer to your ailment in our family. And so it just seemed symbolic. And then there's this image of these workers, and they're all digging and trying to accomplish something. They're in the dirt, and it feels like it's somewhat emblematic of the work ethic that exists in my family and the sort of willingness to kind of get down and dirty, even though there's this educational depth. It doesn't take away that kind of getting in there and doing it yourself attitude that seems to be handed down. Well, at the end of those times, just my dad always reading that in the morning, and always the sections being everywhere, all over our kitchen all the time. And as a family, we'd always go to Idaho. Whenever I wasn't in school or we weren't at the ranch, we'd go to Idaho, and picture of the snow and the pine tree. It just reminds me of that feeling of entering sort of the winter wonderland and connection to nature, which was always really important to counterbalance sort of the hecticness of living where we do. And then up here I've got this glass owl, and it seems to bridge both sides. There are all these owls that live in the barn up at the ranch and flying around, and it's just sort of this kind of spiritual omen, this watcher of the world that flies over and comes out at night, and it's silent. And it's always exciting to see it and to feel its presence and to hear it at night there. And then in terms of connecting over to my dad's side with this image, my grandmother had a collection of all these little antique glass figurines, and she had this big, huge window when you walked into her house, and on the ledge of the window were all these beautiful, brightly colored, antique glass blown creatures that would greet you. So it just seemed to bridge both sides for me. And just in terms of some interesting themes that seem to be passed down, obviously education is a big part of it. It's almost just as natural as breathing air, this expectation that you will get a professional degree and become a professional. And there's also this sort of attitude of service, whether it's in the medical field or the political arena, some sense of service with speech pathology, an autism specialist, psychologist, surgeon, public policy, teacher, all of these things. So there are some interesting threads that come through. Definitely the limitations that women experienced along the way in terms of their role as wife and mother, and women kind of dipping in, out of their careers. Men sort of held steady presence in it all the way through. Obviously, there are some disabilities that limited options for a few people, including my uncle and myself. And I would say culturally, there's just this sort of like dig in, do hard work, try and do good while you're doing it. I think that's sort of the general tone that comes through here. Okay, thanks. See you guys soon.